The summer I turned 12, I
The
thought I
fossil
knew
that sparked
everything
a
there
new
was to know
theory.
about our little village of Kokina, nestled in the hills outside Thessaloniki.
We have very
I
little
knew which
direct
olive
DNA
trees gave the
evidence to go
sweetest
by.
fruit, where the best wild herbs grew along the
Alright, don't be play
mountainside, and
saxophone
exactly how long it
The
took to
narrative of
walk from
human
our house to the
evolution out of
ancient
Europe
ruins that
is not as
dotted our
simple as
landscape
we
like
once
broken
thought.
teeth. What I didn't know was that beneath my feet lay secrets that would change everything I believed about where we came from. It was 1923, and Greece was still catching its breath from all the wars and upheavals. My father, Dmitri, worked the olive groves that had belonged to our family for generations, while my mother, Elena, tended our small garden and helped the other village women with their weaving. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. We had enough food on our table, a solid stone house with thick walls that kept us cool in summer and warm in winter, and each other. The morning everything changed started like any other. The roosters began their chorus before dawn, and I could hear my mother moving around in the kitchen below, stoking the fire and preparing our breakfast of fresh bread, olives, and goat cheese. The August air was already warm even before the sun painted the eastern mountains gold, and I knew it would be another scorching day. Yannis, my mother called up the wooden stairs. Come down and eat before the bread gets cold. I stretched in my narrow bed, feeling the rough wool blanket scratch against my skin. Through my small window, I could see the familiar landscape that had shaped my entire world, terraced hillsides covered with silvery olive trees, the distant gleam of the Thermaic Gulf, and the ancient stones that jutted from the earth like the ribs of some enormous sleeping creature. Those stones had always fascinated me. My grandfather used to tell stories about them when I was little, spinning tales of gods and heroes, of ancient peoples who had lived and died on this same soil thousands of years before we were born. This land has seen everything, little Yannis, he would say, his weathered hands gesturing toward the ruins. If these stones could talk, what stories they would tell. I pulled on my simple cotton shirt and wool trousers, slipped my feet into the leather sandals my father had made for me the previous spring, and clattered down the stairs. The kitchen was filled with the warm scents of baking bread and wood smoke, and my mother stood at the stone hearth, her dark hair braided down her back, humming one of the old songs her grandmother had taught her. "There you are," she said, turning to smile at me. "Your father has already gone to check the groves. He said you should meet him at the upper terrace when you're finished eating." I nodded, tearing off a piece of the still warm bread and dipping it in olive oil. Our olive oil was the golden green kind that seemed to capture sunlight in every drop, and I never tired of its rich, slightly bitter taste. As I ate, I watched through the open door as our neighbor Kyria Sophia hung laundry on the line, her movements efficient despite her age. "Yannis," my mother said, settling beside me with her own breakfast, "there are strangers in the village." This got my attention immediately. Strangers were rare in Kokina. We were too small and remote to attract many visitors, and those who did come were usually relatives from larger towns or merchants selling goods we couldn't make ourselves. "What kind of strangers?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "Foreigners," she said, lowering her voice as if they might hear us from wherever they were staying. "Germans, I think, though they speak some Greek. They arrived yesterday with many boxes and tools. Kyrios Papadopoulos said they're here to study our old ruins." My heart jumped. People who studied ruins. I had always wondered about the ancient stones scattered across our hillsides, but no one in the village knew much about them beyond the stories passed down through generations. The idea that someone might actually understand what they were, who had built them and when, filled me with excitement. I finished my breakfast quickly, kissed my mother goodbye, and headed out into the morning heat. The path to the upper terrace wound through our olive groves, and I knew every twist and turn by heart. The ancient trees stood in neat rows, their gnarled trunks thick with age, their leaves rustling in the slight breeze that came down from the mountains. Some of these trees were older than anyone could remember. My grandfather claimed a few had been planted by his grandfather's grandfather, making them well over a century old. As I walked, I could hear the familiar sounds of village life beginning, donkeys braying, chickens clucking, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. But underneath these everyday noises, I detected something different, voices speaking in a language that wasn't Greek, and the sound of metal tools striking stone. I found my father exactly where I expected, checking the irrigation channels that carried precious water from the mountain springs to our trees. He looked up as I approached, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Good morning, my son," he said. "Ready for another day's work?" "Papa," I said, barely able to contain my curiosity, "Mama said there are foreigners in the village studying the ruins. Can we go see them?" My father laughed, but not unkindly. "So eager to see something new, aren't you?" "Yes, I've heard about them too. Dr. Wilhelm Schmidt from Germany and his assistant. They've set up camp near the old stones on the Mavrose property." The Mavrose property bordered ours on the east side, and I knew the ruins there well. They were more extensive than most of the others scattered around our area, several walls still standing to shoulder height, what looked like the remains of a large building, and most intriguingly, a series of caves that had been carved into the hillside. My friends and I had explored them many times, though we'd never gone very deep. "Can we go look?" I pressed. My father considered this for a moment, then nodded. "After we finish checking the channels. But we must be respectful and not disturb their work." We spent the next 2 hours walking along the irrigation system, clearing debris and making sure water flowed freely to all the trees. It was hot, thirsty work, but I found myself hurrying through each task, anxious to see these foreign scholars and their mysterious work. Finally, my father deemed our morning duties complete, and we set off toward the Mavrose property. As we climbed the rocky path that led to the ruins, I could hear voices more clearly now, men speaking in rapid German punctuated by slower phrases in heavily accented Greek. When we crested the hill, I got my first look at the archaeological camp, and it was like nothing I had ever seen. 2 large canvas tents had been erected near the ruins, and the area buzzed with purposeful activity. Tools I couldn't identify lay arranged on wooden tables, brushes, small shovels, measuring devices, and notebooks filled with what looked like drawings and maps. But what captured my attention most were the 2 men directing all this activity. The older one, who I assumed was Dr. Schmidt, was tall and thin with graying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. He wore practical clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect his face from the sun. Despite the heat, he moved with energy and precision, pointing at different areas of the ruins and speaking rapidly to his companion. The younger man looked to be in his 20s, with sandy hair and sunburned skin. He carried a leather-bound notebook and seemed to write down everything the older man said. Both foreigners were clearly educated, their movements had the careful precision of people accustomed to detailed, methodical work. My father approached them respectfully, removing his hat and speaking in his careful Greek. "Good morning, gentlemen. I am Dmitri Kostas from the village. This is my son Yanis. We hope we are not disturbing your work." Dr. Schmidt looked up from where he had been examining a section of ancient wall, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "Not at all, not at all," he said in heavily accented but comprehensible Greek. "We are always happy to meet local people. I am Dr. Wilhelm Schmidt from the University of Berlin, and this is my assistant, Hans Müller. The younger man nodded politely but seemed more interested in whatever he was writing in his notebook than in conversation with villagers. "What brings you to our humble village?" my father asked. Dr. Schmidt's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone passionate about his work. "These ruins," he said, gesturing toward the ancient stones, "they are much more interesting than they first appear. We believe they may be much older than anyone realized, perhaps dating back to the Bronze Age or even earlier." I found my voice, though I tried to speak respectfully as my father had taught me. "How can you tell how old they are, sir?" Dr. Schmidt looked down at me with interest, as if he hadn't expected a 12-year-old to ask such a question. "Ah, a curious young man. Excellent. You see, there are many clues. The way the stones are cut and fitted together, the style of construction, the pottery fragments we find buried in the soil, all of these things tell us about the people who lived here long ago." He knelt down to my level and pointed toward a section of wall. "Look here, young Yannis. See how these stones are shaped? This is called megalithic construction, using large stones fitted together without mortar. This technique was used by very ancient peoples, long before the classical Greeks you learn about in school." I stared at the wall with new eyes. What I had always seen as just old stones suddenly seemed mysterious and significant. "But sir," I said, "if this place is so old, why hasn't anyone studied it before?" Dr. Schmidt stood up, brushing dust from his knees. "A very good question. The truth is, there are ancient sites all over Greece that have never been properly excavated. We are only beginning to understand how far back human civilization in this region really goes." My father and Dr. Schmidt continued talking while I wandered around the site, looking at everything with new fascination. I watched Hans carefully brush dirt away from what looked like fragments of pottery, revealing painted designs that must have been made by hands that had been dust for thousands of years. The idea made me shiver despite the heat. Near one of the cave entrances, I noticed something that made me pause. The other openings into the hillside were rough and natural looking, but this one seemed different somehow. The edges looked too regular, too purposeful. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the stone, feeling the smooth surfaces that spoke of deliberate human work. "Find something interesting," a voice said behind me in Greek, and I turned to see Dr. Schmidt approaching. "This cave looks different from the others," I said. "Like someone shaped it on purpose." Dr. Schmidt knelt beside me and examined the opening more carefully. "You have good eyes, young man. You are absolutely right, this entrance has been modified by human hands. See these tool marks in the stone? Someone, long ago, enlarged this natural cave for some purpose. Have you been inside?" I asked. "Not yet," he admitted. "We have been focusing on the surface ruins first. But exploring the caves is definitely part of our plan." An idea struck me, and I felt my heart begin to race with excitement. "Sir, I know these caves well. My friends and I have explored them many times. I could show you the safest paths, where the passages lead." Dr. Schmidt looked at me thoughtfully, then glanced toward my father, who had been listening to our conversation. "What do you think, Dmitri? Would you allow your son to help us?" "With your permission, of course, and only if you think it would be safe." My father considered this carefully. I held my breath, afraid he would say no. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Yannis knows these hills better than anyone his age. If you think he could truly be helpful, and if you promise to keep him safe, I have no objection." I wanted to cheer, but I managed to contain myself to a broad grin. Dr. Schmidt reached out and shook my hand formally, as if I were an adult. "Then welcome to our expedition, Yanis Kostas," he said. "You are now officially our local guide and cave consultant." The rest of that day passed in a blur of excitement. Dr. Schmidt and Hans showed me their tools and explained how archaeological excavation worked. I learned about stratigraphy, how different layers of soil told the story of different time periods. I saw how they carefully mapped every find, recording not just what they discovered but exactly where they found it. "Archaeology is like being a detective," Dr. Schmidt explained as we watched Hans painstakingly uncover what looked like part of an ancient cooking pot. "Every small piece of evidence helps us understand the bigger picture of how people lived in the past." That evening, I practically burst with excitement as I told my parents everything I had learned. My mother listened with patient amusement while my father asked thoughtful questions about Dr. Schmidt's theories regarding the age of our local ruins. "Just remember," my mother warned as she tucked me into bed, "these men are educated scholars doing important work. You must be respectful and helpful, not get in their way." I promised to be on my best behavior, though I was so excited I could barely sleep. Outside my window, I could see the faint glow of lanterns from the archaeological camp, and I imagined Dr. Schmidt and Hans reviewing their notes and planning the next day's work. The next morning, I was up before the roosters, dressed and ready to go before my parents had even begun stirring. I helped my father with the morning chores in record time, barely containing my impatience to get back to the excavation site. When we arrived at the camp, I found Dr. Schmidt preparing equipment for cave exploration. He had laid out ropes, lanterns, notebooks wrapped in oilcloth, and various tools I didn't recognize. "Ah, Yanis," he called when he saw me. "Perfect timing. Today we explore the caves, and we need our expert guide." Hans looked less enthusiastic about underground exploration, but he gathered up his notebooks and measuring tools without complaint. Dr. Schmidt handed me one of the lanterns, a heavy brass and glass affair that cast a steady, bright light. "Now," Dr. Schmidt said, "show us what you know about these caves." I led them to the modified entrance we had examined the day before. The opening was large enough for an adult to enter without stooping, and the passage beyond curved to the right, disappearing into darkness. "This is the main entrance," I explained. "The passage goes back about 30 meters before it splits into 3 different tunnels. 2 of them don't go very far, but the third one leads deeper into the hillside." We lit our lanterns and entered the cave. The temperature dropped immediately, providing welcome relief from the already rising heat outside. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the narrow space, and the lantern light threw dancing shadows on the stone walls. As we moved deeper into the cave, Dr. Schmidt stopped frequently to examine the walls and ceiling. "Remarkable," he murmured, running his fingers over the stone. "These walls show clear evidence of human modification. Look here, Yanis, see these chisel marks? Someone spent considerable time and effort enlarging these passages." The cave had always seemed mysterious to me, but seeing it through Dr. Schmidt's expert eyes made it feel almost magical. Every mark on the stone, every variation in the rock told a story about people who had worked here in the distant past. When we reached the point where the passage split into 3 tunnels, I pointed out each direction. The left tunnel goes about 10 meters and then ends at a rock fall. The middle one curves around and comes out on the hillside about 50 meters from here. But the right tunnel, that one goes much deeper. "How deep?" Dr. Schmidt asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "My friends and I never went all the way to the end. It gets narrow in places, and we were always afraid of getting lost." Dr. Schmidt exchanged a glance with Hans. Well, today we are properly equipped for exploration. Lead the way, young guide. The right-hand tunnel was indeed the most interesting. As we moved deeper into the hillside, the passage sometimes widened into small chambers, then narrowed again to barely shoulder width. The walls showed more and more evidence of human modification, areas where the stone had been deliberately shaped and smoothed. We had been walking for perhaps 15 minutes when I noticed something that made me stop abruptly. In the light of my lantern, I could see that the tunnel ahead opened into what looked like a much larger chamber. But more than that, I could smell something different, not the musty, closed smell of the narrow passages, but something fresher, as if air was moving through the space ahead. Dr. Schmidt, I said, I think we've reached a part of the cave I've never seen before. He moved up beside me, holding his lantern high. The light revealed a chamber much larger than anything we had encountered so far, at least 10 meters across and high enough that our lanterns couldn't illuminate the ceiling. Extraordinary, Dr. Schmidt breathed. This is a natural cavern that has been modified extensively. As we entered the chamber, our lanterns revealed carved niches in the walls, areas where the stone floor had been deliberately leveled, and what looked like the remains of ancient fire pits. But what made my heart race with excitement was what I saw in the far corner of the chamber. Partially buried in accumulated soil and debris was what looked like the entrance to yet another passage, but this one was different. It was smaller, more carefully shaped, and around its entrance, someone had carved symbols into the stone. Dr. Schmidt, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, look at this. He hurried over to where I stood, and when his lantern light fell on the carved symbols, he actually gasped. Hans, who had been quiet throughout our exploration, suddenly became very animated, pulling out his notebook and beginning to sketch frantically. This is remarkable, Dr. Schmidt said. These symbols appear to be much older than anything we would expect to find in this region. They don't match any known Greek script. The symbols were roughly carved but clearly deliberate, wavy lines, spirals, shapes that might have been animals or humans. Looking at them, I felt a strange sensation, as if I was looking at messages left by people so ancient that they might as well have been from another world. Should we explore this passage too? I asked. Dr. Schmidt examined the entrance carefully. It was partially blocked by fallen stones and accumulated debris, but it looked like it might be possible to clear it. Not today, he decided. This discovery is too important to rush. We need to document everything carefully, and we need proper equipment to safely clear this entrance. We spent the next hour in the chamber, with Hans making detailed drawings of everything while Dr. Schmidt took measurements and made notes. I held lanterns and fetched tools, feeling proud to be part of such an important discovery. As we finally made our way back through the narrow passages toward the surface, Dr. Schmidt explained to me why the carved symbols were so significant. You see, Yannis, if these symbols are as old as I think they might be, they could represent one of the earliest examples of human symbolic expression in this part of the world. They might tell us about people who lived here thousands and thousands of years ago, perhaps even before the ancient Greeks you know about from stories. When we emerged blinking into the bright sunlight, I felt like we had been underground for hours, though Dr. Schmidt's pocket watch showed that barely 2 hours had passed. The world above ground seemed almost too bright and loud after the quiet mystery of the cave chamber. That afternoon, Dr. Schmidt sent Hans to Thessaloniki with detailed letters describing their discovery. Meanwhile, we returned to the surface excavation, though I found it hard to concentrate on pottery fragments when I kept thinking about those mysterious symbols carved into the stone deep beneath our feet. Over the next several days, The excavation site became busier than our little village had ever seen. More scholars arrived from Athens and even from other countries. They brought additional equipment, more sophisticated tools, and an excitement that infected everyone around them. My role as local guide and cave expert made me something of a celebrity among the archaeologists. They asked me detailed questions about every aspect of the cave system, and several of them made expeditions into the passages with me as their guide. Each time, I learned something new about the scientific process of understanding the past. Dr. Schmidt began to teach me how to read the clues that archaeologists use. He showed me how to identify different types of stone tools, how to recognize ancient pottery styles, and how to spot the subtle signs that indicated human habitation in the distant past. The key to archaeology, he explained one evening as we sat outside his tent reviewing the day's finds, is learning to see what others might overlook. You have natural talent for this, Yannis. You notice details that even trained archaeologists sometimes miss. His words filled me with pride, but more than that, they awakened something in me I hadn't known existed. For the first time in my life, I began to imagine a future beyond our village, beyond the olive groves and familiar hills. I began to dream of becoming an archaeologist myself, of traveling to distant places and uncovering secrets that had been hidden for thousands of years. Meanwhile, work on clearing the blocked passage in the cave chamber proceeded slowly and carefully. The archaeologists had to remove each stone and bit of debris methodically, documenting everything they found. Ancient pottery fragments, stone tools, and even pieces of worked bone emerged from the fill that blocked the passage. Everything tells us something, Dr. Schmidt explained as he examined a small fragment of decorated pottery. This piece, for example, has a style of decoration that we associate with very early periods of human civilization in this region. As the passage was gradually cleared, it became evident that it led to yet another chamber, this one smaller than the first but containing something that made all the archaeologists extremely excited. The walls of this inner chamber were covered with paintings. I was one of the first people to see them. Dr. Schmidt had insisted that I should be there when they broke through the last of the debris blocking the passage, in recognition of my role in the discovery. When our lanterns first illuminated those ancient paintings, I felt something that I still struggle to describe, a connection across vast reaches of time to the human hands that had created those images. The paintings showed animals, deer, wild boar, what might have been aurochs or ancient cattle. But they also showed human figures, and these were unlike anything I had ever seen in the classical Greek art I knew from school and from ruins around our region. These paintings, Dr. Schmidt said, his voice filled with awe, could be among the oldest examples of human art in Europe. Look at the style, the technique, this is truly extraordinary. But the most remarkable discovery was yet to come. In the deepest part of the painted chamber, Hans noticed something that made him call urgently for Dr. Schmidt. Buried in the soft earth of the cave floor, they had found bones. Not human bones, as I first feared, but the bones of animals, and not just any animals. As Dr. Schmidt carefully excavated around the find, it became clear that these were the remains of creatures unlike anything that lived in our region in modern times. This appears to be the skeleton of an early primate, Dr. Schmidt explained to me as he gently brushed dirt away from what looked like a skull. Not quite ape, not quite human, but something in between. The implications of this discovery sent ripples of excitement through the archaeological community that eventually reached far beyond our small village. Scholars arrived from universities across Europe, all eager to see and study what was quickly being recognized as a find of extraordinary importance. As the summer progressed, our once quiet village became an international center of archaeological attention. Newspaper reporters arrived to write stories about the discovery. Photographers came to document everything. Officials from the Greek government visited to assess the significance of the find. Through it all, I remained Dr. Schmidt's trusted local guide and assistant. He made sure I was present for all the major discoveries, and he continued to teach me about archaeological methods and interpretation. I began to keep my own notebook, documenting everything I observed and learned. "You are receiving an education that money cannot buy," my father told me one evening as we watched the activity at the excavation site. "These scholars are teaching you things that no school in our region could offer." My mother was equally supportive, though she worried about how all this excitement might change my life. "Just remember where you come from, my son," she would say. "No matter how far you might travel or what you might learn, this village and this family will always be your home." The most significant discovery came in late August, just as the summer was beginning to cool and Dr. Schmidt was preparing to conclude his excavation season. Deep in the painted chamber, the team uncovered what appeared to be a deliberate burial, the complete skeleton of one of the early primates, surrounded by primitive stone tools and what looked like offerings of some kind. This, Dr. Schmidt announced to the assembled team of archaeologists, may represent some of the earliest evidence of ritual behavior in human ancestors. The way this individual was buried, with tools and other objects, suggests a level of symbolic thinking that we didn't expect to find in such early hominids. I stood at the edge of the excavation area, watching as the scientists carefully exposed and documented every detail of this ancient burial. The bones were dark with age, and the skull, when finally revealed, showed a mixture of features that seemed both human and ape-like. "Yannis," Dr. Schmidt called to me, "come here. I want you to see this." I approached carefully, knowing that I was looking at something that might rewrite the understanding of human evolution. The skull was larger than that of a modern ape but smaller than that of a modern human. The face was projecting, with large teeth, but the forehead was higher and more rounded than what you would expect in a true ape. This individual, Dr. Schmidt explained, lived perhaps 2 or 3 million years ago. It represents a stage in human evolution that bridges the gap between our ape ancestors and modern humans. As I stared at that ancient skull, I felt a strange mixture of awe and connection. This creature had lived and died on the same hillside where I had spent my entire life, but in a world so different from mine that it might as well have been another planet. Yet something about the careful burial, the evidence of tool use, spoke of minds that could think symbolically, that could contemplate death and meaning in ways that connected them across vast reaches of time to modern humans. The discovery made international news. Articles appeared in newspapers across Europe and America describing the Greek ape man and its implications for understanding human evolution. Scientists debated its significance in academic journals. Dr. Schmidt became famous practically overnight, invited to lecture at universities around the world. But for me, the most important impact was personal. Dr. Schmidt had arranged for me to receive a scholarship to attend gymnasium in Thessaloniki, where I could get the education I would need to eventually study archaeology at university. It meant leaving my village, leaving my family, entering a world I had never imagined possible. The night before I was to leave for the city, my family and I sat together on our terrace, looking out over the hills where the excavation had taken place. The archaeologists had covered their excavation areas and would return the following summer to continue their work. The village had returned to its normal quiet rhythm, though nothing would ever be quite the same. "You know," my father said, "your grandfather always said these hills held secrets. I think he would be amazed to know how right he was." My mother reached over and took my hand. "Promise me you'll never forget where you come from, Yannis." No matter how educated you become, no matter how far you travel, remember that your roots are here. I promised, and I meant it. But as I looked out over the landscape that had shaped my childhood, I also felt the pull of a larger world, a world where the mysteries of the past waited to be uncovered and understood. The next morning, Dr. Schmidt's car arrived to take me to Thessaloniki. As we drove away from Kokona, I watched my village disappear behind the hills, but I carried with me more than just memories. I carried the knowledge that the past was not dead and buried, that it lived on in fragments and traces waiting to be discovered by those with the patience and skill to look for them. Dr. Schmidt continued to mentor me throughout my school years. During summers, I returned to work on the excavation, which had become a major archaeological site drawing researchers from around the world. Each season brought new discoveries that added to our understanding of early human evolution and the deep history of human presence in Greece. The skeleton we had found that first summer, the one Dr. Schmidt had nicknamed the ape from Greece, did indeed prove to be of extraordinary scientific importance. Detailed study confirmed that it represented a previously unknown species of early hominid, one that filled a crucial gap in the fossil record of human evolution. But more than the scientific importance of the discovery, what stayed with me was the sense of connection it provided, to the deep past, to the long chain of ancestry that connected me to those ancient people who had painted animals on cave walls and buried their dead with care and ceremony. Years later, when I had become an archaeologist myself and was leading my own excavations in other parts of Greece, I would often think back to that summer when I was 12 years old and first learned to see the past in pottery fragments and tool marks in stone. Dr. Schmidt had been right, archaeology was like being a detective, but it was more than that. It was a way of honoring the people who had come before us, of ensuring that their stories would not be lost to time. The painted caves near my village are now protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Tourists come from around the world to see the ancient art and to visit the small museum that displays some of the artifacts we discovered. My village has prospered from this attention, though it has also changed in ways that my 12-year-old self could never have imagined. Sometimes, when I return home to visit my parents, I climb up to the old excavation site and sit quietly among the ruins. If I close my eyes and listen carefully, I can almost hear the voices of those ancient people who lived and worked and died on these hillsides so long ago. I can imagine the artist who painted deer and aurochs on the cave walls, working by flickering firelight, creating images that would survive for millennia. And I think about how that summer changed everything for me, how a curious 12-year-old boy's willingness to explore caves and ask questions opened up a world of possibilities he had never imagined. The ape from Greece that might be our ancestor did more than expand scientific understanding of human evolution. It connected me to a story that stretches back millions of years, a story that reminds us that we are all part of something much larger and older than our individual lives. The tools and techniques of archaeology have advanced tremendously since that summer in 1923, but the fundamental excitement of discovery remains the same. Every fragment of pottery, every stone tool, every ancient painting has the potential to tell us something new about who we are and where we came from. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we uncover something that changes our understanding of humanity itself. Dr. Schmidt passed away many years ago, but his influence on my life continues. He taught me that the past is not a foreign country but rather the foundation upon which the present is built. He showed me that every place has stories to tell, if only we learn how to listen. Today, when I work with young students beginning their own archaeological careers, I try to pass on not just the technical skills they will need, but also the sense of wonder and connection that Dr. Schmidt shared with me. I tell them about a summer when a village boy helped uncover one of the most important paleoanthropological discoveries of the 20th century, and how that discovery opened up a world of possibilities neither of us had imagined. The ape from Greece turned out to be more than just a scientific specimen. It was a bridge across time, connecting us to our deepest ancestral past and reminding us that the story of humanity is far longer and more complex than we once believed. And sometimes, in the quiet of an excavation site or in the depths of an ancient cave, I can still feel that sense of wonder I experienced as a 12-year-old boy, holding a lantern in the darkness and seeing ancient symbols carved into stone by hands that had been dust for millennia. That summer taught me that we are all archaeologists of our own lives, constantly uncovering and reinterpreting the past that has shaped us. The fragments we find, whether they are ancient pottery shards or childhood memories, all contribute to our understanding of who we are and where we belong in the long story of human existence. The discovery we made in those painted caves near my village continues to influence scientific understanding of human evolution. But for me, its most important legacy is personal, the reminder that curiosity and careful observation can lead to discoveries that change everything we think we know about ourselves and our place in the world.